Hello and welcome to Business on the Wire. Vaccination drives have kicked off worldwide. Most states in India kicked off their vaccination sessions from the 21st of January, which means that India is likely to cross the 1 million vaccine doses administered mark very soon. But the drive has come with a high wave of vaccine hesitancy. People are reluctant to be vaccinated with the lack of enough data, and of course, withholding data has caused serious trust issues. What are the key concerns on vaccine safety in India? What will availability look like for India and other developed countries indeed? And how much of a threat does the new virus or the multiple new virus strains present? Joining me to talk about all of that is Dr. Ashish Jha, Dean at Brown University School of Public Health. Thank you so much, first and foremost, for taking time out to speak with me. I know that you have voiced a sense of frustration about how slow the pace of vaccine administering has been. What, to your mind, is the major impediment at this point?
Yeah, and we're talking about vaccine administration in the United States, right?
Yeah.
The vaccine administration in the United States has gone much more slowly than we were promised. I think the main problem was the Trump administration really did not do any planning for vaccine administration. They did a good job of producing a reasonable number of vaccine doses, but then did very little planning on how those doses were actually going to get into people's arms, and left it up to states. And there were really no resources and no plans. And that has been the major reason why it's been slowed down. But it is starting to pick up. It is starting to get better. States are figuring out how to do this. And of course, as of a few days ago, we now have a new administration, which of course is going to be very different in its approach to vaccine distribution.
Mm. I imagine the situation is quite different for the continents that we're both sitting in, you in the United States and me here in India. But is there a sense that the vaccines have been undersold even in the space that you're functioning in?
Absolutely. I think these vaccines are really quite terrific. They're very high quality. Certainly Moderna and Pfizer vaccines are. The Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, I think, offers a very high degree of protection as well. That's, of course, Covishield that India is using. And I think we have not done enough to explain to people how valuable these vaccines are and just how much protection they really offer.
Mm. Is there enough information you think about these vaccines and how they may take on the fresh strains, though, Doctor? Because that really seems to be the raging fear at this point. What's happened in the UK, the South Africa strain, and all of this has spread quite fast across geographies.
Yeah, so obviously we're still learning how well these vaccines are going to work against the new strains. I guess I have a few thoughts. I mean, first is all the data I have seen suggests that all of these vaccines should remain quite effective against the UK variant. There are some concerns about the South Africa variant and whether it's going to be, whether the vaccines are going to continue to be quite as effective. I suspect they will, that the few laboratory studies that have raised concerns will not end up playing out in clinical data, but we don't know for sure. And the good news is that these vaccines can be updated. These vaccines can be changed relatively quickly, so that if we need a different version of a vaccine to deal with the South Africa variant, that is possible to do. So I remain very optimistic that vaccines are the path out of the situation we are in. It may not be a straight path, it may not be a fast path, but it is the path by which we will bring this pandemic to an end.
Mm. The UK has suffered its worst sort of death toll, though, this week, Dr. Jha. The numbers are completely mind boggling. Their own chief scientist says that hospitals look like war zones. Do you fear that this might get worse before it gets better, though?
Absolutely. I think that if this is really now a race against time, the UK is the cautionary tale of what happens when this variant takes off. And one of the things that I have been arguing for the US, but really for around the world, is that the UK variant is much more contagious. It can end up very quickly overwhelming a population. And that's why it's critical to both monitor the variants to make sure that you know how much it's spreading. But second is to get people vaccinated, because one of the best ways of protecting a population against the UK variant is having widespread vaccination. So vaccines are not just something that's going to be good over the long run. There's a very strong benefit of having it out in the short run so that people can be better protected against this variant.
You've been quite vocal about your support for the United States now coming back into the fold of the WHO initiative, the fact that that 1 year notice has been re-signed. Uh, do you candidly feel, though, that there is benefit for the US to be part of this COVAX initiative, which seems to be more for those who are lesser privileged financially as nations?
I do. I think there is absolutely a benefit for the US to be involved, not just in WHO, but specifically COVAX. So, first of all, the whole idea of rescinding our membership and walking away from WHO was just, in my mind, it was incredibly short sighted. It was very childish. It was I am not happy with this situation, so I'm going to leave. It's not adult like behavior. And I think that we had to go back and rejoin WHO. On COVAX, one of the points that I have tried to make both to the American public, but also globally, is that, the pandemic, if it has taught us nothing at all, it has got to have taught us that we're all in this together, that you can't have large chunks of the world unvaccinated with large outbreaks and think that other parts of the world are going to be safe. Even under the best of circumstances, if imagine 80 or 90% of America gets vaccinated, it will still leave America vulnerable to infections from other places coming and seeding cases. So even if we are only selfish and think about ourselves alone, we have to get the world vaccinated. Of course, we should not just be selfish. We should have a very different attitude and approach. So there are many reasons for us to join COVAX. One of them certainly is to help make sure that we are really promoting health and well-being for everybody around the world and really being part of that solution that I think is so important.
It's interesting you say that, though, Doctor, in an environment where terms like vaccine apartheid and vaccine nationalism are now raging. There are many nations that not just have a lack of speed, but a complete lack of access to any option in terms of vaccines. How do you see the next few years shaping up, where there will be a bulk of a population, perhaps in the EU region and the Americas, that is vaccinated, but a huge other space that is not? Is that going to keep the situation on the boil for many more months, you reckon?
I'm very worried about that. And that's actually the situation that is both likely, but also something that is avoidable. I shouldn't say it's likely. It can easily happen if we do not take care to avoid that. So I think that that situation you laid out, where the EU region, the America, as Canada and US are vaccinated, but much of the world is not, is unacceptable. I think it's a huge problem. I think it causes political instability. I think it causes economic instability. It's certainly bad for public health. And we have to do everything we can to avoid that. And that means America's got to play a helpful role in helping drive up vaccine production. Not just for Americans, but for everybody else, that countries really have to band together to say, what else can we do to ramp up production and then ramp up distribution around the world? This vaccine apartheid, I think, is unacceptable. And in a global pandemic, we should not accept it as the natural consequence of how things will play out.
I want to pivot the conversation for a bit from accessibility and availability to large-scale vaccine hesitancy. It is rampant in India for sure, Dr. Jha. Would you say there is a degree of legitimacy to this vaccine hesitancy in countries where there is not enough data available in terms of the efficacy, or even whether the phases of trial have been stepped through by these companies providing these vaccines?
Yeah, so I think of vaccine hesitancy in two groups. I mean, there is a small group of people who are just against vaccines under every circumstance. And I think we need to reach out to them and talk to them, but those are going to be hard people to move. But then there is a large chunk of people who are hesitant for legitimate reasons. They worry about how quickly the clinical trials have gone. They worry about long-term data. They're not going to be hesitant about vaccines, of all vaccines, but they just worry about this situation. And I completely understand that. I have family members who are like that, who say to me, I worry about whether we have enough information here. And I say to them, I understand your concern. The good news is that these vaccines, whether it's Covishield in India, AstraZeneca Oxford, or it's Moderna or Pfizer, they have gone through every step that any vaccine goes through. In fact, most drugs and vaccines are approved with hundreds of people, maybe 1,000 people in clinical trials. These vaccines have had tens of thousands of people in clinical trials with very long follow-up. It's gone fast because we're in a crisis. And so we have made sure that all the sort of paperwork and those things move much more quickly. But we haven't cut any steps in the regular process. And that's what makes me so confident. In terms of long-term, most vaccines, the side effects, the negative effects will show up usually within weeks of the vaccine. Certainly by 2 months, almost all the side effects are obvious. That's why these vaccines have been tracked now for many, many months. They are remarkably safe. I mean, they're not perfect, nothing is, but they are remarkably safe. And they're certainly much, much safer than getting COVID itself. So that's why I think it's very important that people get vaccinated. And I think the people who are hesitant, you have to talk to them with respect and share the data and explain the thinking. And I think that will persuade most people.
There are situations, though, where it's not about the data is just not available, doctor, and the data has frankly not been conducted. I mean, here in India, you talked about Covishield, but the other one that is being administered is Covaxin, on which we do have phase 3 data. Do you think that is a major breach of trust? And do you think that people are warranted in their concerns on getting, vaccinated by that one?
Yeah, I actually have a lot of concerns about Covaxin, not because I think it is not safe or effective, but because I don't know. We don't have phase 3 trial data. And I think it was a mistake to authorize Covaxin without phase 3 data. Phase 3 data is absolutely critical. It is actually the phase that tells us whether a vaccine works or not. And to authorize a vaccine without phase 3 data, to me, is unacceptable. Russia did that with its Sputnik 5, but India should not be following Russia's standards on these things. India's scientific community, its capabilities are, in my mind, at the same level as what we see in Western Europe and the United States. And that's the standard it should be held to. I am very excited about the idea of an indigenously developed vaccine in India, but it should be held to the same international standards that all other vaccines are. So I remain puzzled and concerned about that decision by the Indian government. But so that's why I have brought up Covishield as one where there is very good data, but I agree. Covaxin remains one where we just don't know if it's effective or not.
So here's the situation as it stands in India at this point, doctor, especially for health workers. You have to get vaccinated. You have the option, but not the choice between the two vaccines. And basically, you're taking a decision depending on your own understanding of what the safety or efficacy of these vaccines is. Would you have been vaccinated with the Covaxin as a health worker if that was presented to you?
So I would definitely be comfortable getting vaccinated with Covishield. I would not get vaccinated with Covaxin unless it was part of a clinical trial, because I don't believe that we have enough evidence right now to be administering Covaxin to health workers or to anybody else. Again, outside of a clinical trial. Clinical trials are, of course, different because you're testing it at that point. So that's a different purpose. But right now, I think the vaccine that people should be focusing on distributing is Covishield, and we should be studying Covaxin to figure out if it's effective or not.
As you mentioned, India actually has a pretty rich sort of legacy in terms of the, what it's done in the world of vaccines. Many scientists raised serious concerns about what was done and how this was, sped through without enough data available or even phase 3 trial data available. Would you say this has tarnished the image of India, or do you think this is something it can recover? Because vaccine diplomacy for India at least has started. We're shipping to countries like Bhutan, etc. The AstraZeneca version, not the Bharat Biotech one.
Yeah. I mean, look, I don't think it has done long-term damage. I think it can recover, absolutely. But it has been puzzling to those of us who have been very proud of the Indian scientific enterprise and feel that this pandemic has been an opportunity for India to show itself to be a global scientific player. Not just in production, but also in the creation of science. So not just as a manufacturer of vaccines, but as a creator of new vaccines. And that's why I thought the Bharat Biotech approach on Covaxin was so good. And then I thought the decision at the last minute to give it authorization without phase 3 was puzzling. And I think, frankly, harmful. And again, not long-term damage. I think it can be reversed. And given the size of India and our resources, no reason to think that we can't do a proper phase 3 study, figure out how well it works, if it works at all, and then administer it, assuming it is safe and effective, then administer it widely. That would be the right way to go. And that's what the Indian government should be pushing for.
There have been some concerns, Dr. Jha, on Covishield as well, in terms of the advocated efficacy, whether the gap of 4 weeks is enough or is it doing more damage. Any thoughts on that? Because at this point, these are the only two options available for India.
Right. Yeah, so Covishield in general has gone through vigorous clinical trials. There is some confusion about the exact dose, how long you have to wait. I think we're going to have more data on that in the upcoming weeks. So I'm actually pretty optimistic. There are more clinical trials being run. There's more data coming out of the UK, the US. So my hope is in the next month, we'll have more clarity. It's not perfect data. And I wish that the AstraZeneca data was a little bit cleaner, but it is still quite robust data that shows that it is both safe and effective. We do have to get a little more information about exact dosing and timeline, which my hope is we'll have in the next few weeks, and that'll guide the rest of the vaccination campaign.
How does one go about this in a country like India, Dr. Jha, where there is a high level of nearly 40 to 50% of NCDs or non-communicable diseases that have gone unreported or undetected? And there is a threat when you're being vaccinated on the one hand, and on the other hand, ensuring that you are respecting the dignity of people who are signing up for these trials, that you are giving them all the adequate information and means to any redressal.
Absolutely. No, this is complicated and very, very important. One of the things we want to make sure is that people do have choice and people do have autonomy and the ability to participate in these trials with full information. I actually think India has done a lot of good work in the last few years as a site for clinical trials for therapeutics, to say we don't just want to be a country that people experiment on, that people show up and do experiments in. And I think India has put in a lot of safeguards. So again, I think as a place to do clinical trials, India is, I think, quite advanced and has made good progress. But there are these very substantial challenges with a lot of people who are less well educated, more. So making sure that we do those things with kind of proper safeguards remains a very important issue.
Do you believe that those infected or already infected should still go ahead and take the vaccination?
I do. I think that is the recommendation. We don't know how long immunity lasts from infections, and I think everybody should get vaccinated, whether they were previously infected or not.
And at this point, India seems to be on the same step as the United States, which is that the elderly get vaccinated first. But there's interesting examples like Indonesia, doctor, where the working population, the more active population, is the one that's getting the shot first. Any pros and cons over here?
Yeah, I think they both have some reasonable arguments behind them. I don't think one is clearly better than the other. I also favor vaccinating older people first because that's the group that gets sick and dies from this virus. The other strategy of working class people getting vaccinated first is incumbent on being 100% sure that the vaccine prevents transmission quite effectively. That's why you would do it, so that you can prevent transmission and slow down spread. We still don't have very good data on that. My best read of the evidence is that it does prevent transmission some. So I think the Indonesia approach, while reasonable, probably in my mind is we just don't have the scientific evidence quite there yet to me justify it. Again, there's nothing wrong with the Indonesia approach. I think it makes sense to me from a public health point of view. But I think the India approach, the UK approach, the US approach is a bit better grounded right now because we know that older people are the ones who get sick and they should be protected.
The US has a problem with speed of administering vaccinations, Dr. Jha. India has a problem of numbers. I mean, we've done this kind of a drive with polio. We are equipped. We're doing things like Israel, pulling in more people and volunteers to administer vaccines. But do you still believe that it's universal vaccination that is the only way to ensure herd immunity? Because that's a long road for India in terms of numbers.
It is a long road. And that is, unfortunately, the only approach that we have. You don't need to get to 80, 90% before the pandemic comes to an end. You will make a lot of progress, even by the time 30, 40% of people are vaccinated. That will slow things down a lot. But if we don't get to very, very high numbers of people vaccinated, the virus will continue to pop up, continue to spread, we'll continue seeing outbreaks. So it is critical that the strategy is to get to a vast majority of Indians, vast majority of Americans, vast majority of English people and French people and Russians and Chinese ultimately getting vaccinated, because that's how we're going to bring the pandemic to an end.
Just one final question on how long you think this disjointed world can stay, Doctor. At this point, options like Pfizer, Moderna, possibly Johnson & Johnson are not even available to countries like India and others. There is a cost issue as well that is layered within that. Do you believe that this disbalance is going to stay for a while in an already unequal world?
Yeah, I think it's up to us as a global community, and I think it's unacceptable that we have a world where some people get certain vaccines and other people get other vaccines based on ability to pay and where you live. And one of the reasons why I have been a very strong advocate of America joining COVAX, rejoining WHO, is America, I think, needs to sit down with our partner nations, not just wealthy ones, but countries from around the world, and ask, what can we do as a global community to ramp up production of high quality vaccines everywhere? And I don't believe it is beyond the ingenuity of the people of the world to be able to get high quality vaccines produced. But it's not going to happen if we just let the natural course run. So I remain optimistic that with the current administration now, the Biden administration, much more interested in globally engaging, given a lot of countries, I think, that are going to not find the idea of some countries having good vaccines and other countries having no vaccines acceptable. I don't find that acceptable. I do think there's an opportunity to do things differently, but it's going to take proactive work.
Dr. Jha, I appreciate your time. I know you have an extremely busy schedule, but thank you for stepping out and speaking with me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.